Hey, marvelous mom. When is the last time you've experienced loss? Now, this loss can be a job, a relationship. This loss can be because of death. It could be a loss because of a good thing in life, like a baby being born or a new house. There's loss involved in transitions of life. It might be loss of freedom, loss of a dream, just loss of any kind. Boy, I have experienced many losses, and I didn't realize how much harm I had done to my own soul and even my physical body over the years because I didn't deal with loss. After all, in my young years, I had no one modeling or mentoring me on how to navigate loss. As I became a mother and experienced so many losses, I was too busy to give any thought or that I even needed to address or pay attention to loss. One day, my world came crashing down. I could not help but grieve and deal with the loss. I had to learn to take sorrow and suffering by the hand to lead me through loss and grieving if I wanted to be able to parent. Beloved, I was a messy, slobbery pool of grief. It took time in the Word of God, prayer, counseling, friendships, and lots of tears to navigate through that grief. I made a lot of mistakes in the process, but I did learn how vital grieving is, not just to me, but to my children. Over the years, I've learned what it looks like and feels like to grieve in a healthy way. One of my favorite teachers, spiritual life coaches, and one of my best friends is with me on today's episode of Mom to Mom Mentoring. I have learned so much from her about healthy grieving, and I'm excited to invite you into our conversation today. My guest today is Laurie Goddu.
Healthy grieving is moving through the pain. Healthy grieving is a process, and God intended it would take time.
As an ordained minister with an associate's degree in theology, Laurie has been trained in a wide variety of prayer and healing models. She also holds a Masters Splankna practitioner certification to help people identify and release the pain of trauma alongside forgiveness. Splankna is a healing modality using prayer and muscle testing. Laurie is a published author, and the titles of her books and workbooks will be listed in the show notes, along with the link for you to connect with her. Her business, His Mosaic, serves as a testament to God's amazing healing power in her life after much brokenness and loss, which we're going to dive more into on today's episode of Mom to Mom Mentoring. Hey, Mom, has anyone told you lately that you are awesome? I know. Managing the kids, the meals, the laundry, the business, the team, the home, it's a lot. And sometimes we lose sight of all the amazing things we are doing. So I'm showing up today to remind you that you are amazing and to help you live, lead, and love from that wellspring of amazingness. And the good news is every week, I want to show up in your podcast feed to remind you that you are absolutely marvelous. My name is Misty Hughes, and I'm so glad you're here with me today on Mom to Mom Mentoring. I am your gratitude guide, your celebration coach, and your mom mentor. This podcast is to help support you on your journey. Today, I would like to invite you to hit subscribe so you don't miss a tantalizing episode of Mom to Mom Mentoring. Laurie will use segments of her own journey to help you understand what healthy grieving looks like, how to healthily grieve, what happens to our bodies when we neglect grieving properly. Marvelous Mom, Laurie is even going to give you tools and tips for helping your children grieve in a healthy, life-giving way. Laurie, first of all, thanks so much for being here with me today and sharing your wisdom and experience with the mom to mom family. No one likes the idea of grieving, but loss is a part of life. We've all lost something or someone, but many of us haven't grieved that loss or even known how to grieve. I'd like to start our conversation today by having you define just what grieving is.
This is very fresh for me because last week I cried most days in grief with my children who not only lost a baby, but their dog in the same week. It's the pain of losing something or someone, whether that is a job, a home, a dream, a vision, person, animal. The pain that comes with that is sorrow, anguish, and confusion and feeling lost. It can make us feel very alone. The word says that God is near to us when we're brokenhearted. So I think to me, grieving is about being brokenhearted.
Gosh, Lori, those are some really difficult words you used in describing grief. Pain, loss, confusion, alone, broken-hearted, anguish, sorrow. Gee, no wonder we don't like to talk about grief. Those are hard words that describe what grief is all about. And something I've also found is oftentimes we don't give ourselves permission to grieve over loss that we feel. When I turned 50 a few years ago, I found out I had rheumatoid arthritis. And I remember giving myself permission to grieve the loss of my health. What are some things through your experience as a therapist that people often avoid or don't think about grieving about?
Yeah, you said one of them, finding out you have an illness. It's a loss of health, loss of a dream, loss of a partnership, loss of a marriage, loss of relationship. That happened so much during COVID, where relationships were segmented or shut off. Loss of a gift. It can be so many things, and most people don't think about those things as counting. When I lost my husband in 2002, I lost my position. I lost my sense of identity. Those kinds of things we often don't allow ourselves to go through a grieving process. We just go, that's life. I got to move on. I got to deal with it.
Yeah, and you know what's crazy is we experience loss even when good things happen, like when we have a baby. I mean, that's a great thing, but we lose the freedom that we had before we became a mother. A new job might mean a loss of time that you spent working out or time that you had with your kids. So even when good things happen, we experience loss and we don't give ourselves permission to grieve those losses, but the loss is still very real. Oftentimes, busy moms just don't have the time to sit and cry like you shared your experience was last week. So, what is your recommendation to the moms that are listening that just don't have the time to give themselves over to the emotion?
Yeah, that's the hard one. I was a single mom for 14 and a half years, so I know how hard it is. I took time in the shower because that was my alone time, not only with the Lord, but my place to express emotion, whether that was sorrow or anger that felt safe. Going to get massage is another way because there's so many stored emotions, and the touch can help you process stored emotions like grief. It can bring them to the surface so you can cry. Exercising, for a long walk and doing a Epsom salt bath helps detox your body. And while you're in there and you're relaxing, you just cry.
Oh gosh, I remember I took so many baths during my intense season of sorrow after my marriage ended. And I would do exactly what you're saying. My kids would go off and be with their dad for the weekend, and I would run a hot bath and sink down in the bathtub, and I would just cry. What I'm hearing you say is that was a really good thing.
I always say you take advantage of every moment. I know many times driving in the car, I got in touch with an emotion and started crying. Taking advantage when you feel the emotion come up inside of you and it's right in your throat, and you're like, oh, this isn't a good time. Choose for it to be a good time, even if it takes 3 to 5 minutes, because it doesn't take that much crying, that many minutes for there to be some release that feels tangible in our bodies. And when we cry, there are so many toxins that are being released. And so whether it's 3 minutes or 1 minute, 5 minutes, it still counts. And it makes a difference in our capacity to go, oh, I can move forward. I can breathe. I can take a deep breath. So for busy moms, even if it's inconvenient, making sure you give yourself the space, even if it means you slip into a bathroom, you're at work, you take 3 minutes just to let it out, not try to shove it back down.
You just gave us some great information on how to grieve, ways that we can access some of that grief, and encouraged everyone to choose to grieve, to give yourself permission to grieve. But Lori, what is healthy grieving? And how do I know if I'm grieving in a way that is healthy?
Great question. Healthy grieving is moving through the pain. Now, when we get really hit hard and it swallows us up and we get into a hole, and that's not all bad, but we can't stay there long term. So, one of the ways that you know you're healthily grieving is if you are moving through the grief. Healthy grieving is a process, and God intended it would take time. It comes in waves, and the most intense or what feels the most overwhelming is in the beginning for most people. That doesn't mean you won't feel overwhelmed down the road. You'll know that you're doing better by it gets a little less intense or it gets shorter. So if it's as intense, but it doesn't last 5 days, it lasts one. And I say to most people, if after 8 months to a year, you're not progressing, you still feel like you have to claw your way out of the hole on a daily basis, you need some support. You need some medication or supplements or to process with a professional. I ended up having to do that in a couple of seasons of my life. Even though I'm not a super pro medication person, I probably would have crashed and burned completely without the support of an antidepressant. It kept me stable enough to continue to work on the pain and work through it instead of being swallowed up by it.
You give freedom to do what we need to do in order to be able to function as mothers and move through the pain and deal with the brokenheartedness. One thing I have read the Bible is when there was loss, mourning garments were worn, and everybody knew that you were in mourning. That gave permission to go through the process and make progress. I know in our culture, you might get 3 days off work when you've lost a family member, but we don't give space for grieving.
Most cultures don't, but ours is really bad. Most people, even in the church, expect you to be better within a month. I think of Naomi in the Bible because, she walked around saying, my name is Mara, I'm bitter. And she did that the entire journey. She didn't change her name back to Naomi until after, I believe, Ruth met Boaz. As we spend time feeling it, experiencing it, letting it up and out, moving through it, we find him and his presence in surprising ways. He never, ever, ever intended that we should do this process alone. I remember years ago going to New Orleans and there was a funeral while I was there and they were in the street parading and playing music and people were wearing their dark black clothes and people were throwing their rags in the air, demonstrating we've lost a family member and everything stopped for them to go through as they marched through the downtown area. We don't get invited into that in our culture. We're actually supposed to do this together at some level. I think it's God's intention that we would find community and comfort in it. Because the word says, weep with those who weep, rejoice with those who rejoice. And that's not alone.
So, community is vital to grieving. We seem to do it in isolation. We go hide in the bathroom, and that might be appropriate when we're at work, but when we're in our home, we stuff it down until we're in bed at night. We do it in the bathroom. We don't want our kids to see us grieving or friends. What do we do about that?
And you have to be really intentional. You have to choose some safe people in your world. You could say, hey, when I'm having a really bad day, can I call you? Can we just walk? I don't need you to fix it. Being willing to invite others in because so many in our culture don't know how to knock gently on the door. And what we tend to do is when I'm not sure what to say, we don't say anything and we stay away, which is not what we need. One thing that we do offer in the culture that is so helpful are grief groups. And those can be super helpful. I think another thing that we can do is really be intentional about setting our body and our soul up by playing music that helps us. I know when I lost my husband, I played the radio. There was a set of songs by a group called Evanescence, and their songs just portray that depth of anguish I was feeling. They were dark and they were powerful. And I would just crank them up. They would help me cry. Music is frequency. It resonates with our body. Like David would play for Saul. His music would set him free from his demons. We need music and the arts and beauty and things like that that help us get in touch.
You have given so much insight about what it looks like to grieve in a healthy way. You've mentioned how massages, baths, giving yourself permission to weep, and so many great things we can do that are healthy in the process that is so extremely difficult. But Laurie, I'm wondering what happens if we don't do those things?
Oh, I can tell you what will happen because I was
Okay.
that woman. I was set up in my journey as a child to not feel negative emotion. And because my family did not allow me to grieve my dad dying when I was 12 years old, I just learned to survive and lock down, not grieve. I wasn't given the opportunity, what it did in my body, and I can reference what we'll do in most bodies, was I started having cycles of depression. I couldn't figure out why. There was nothing I could look at in my world at present that would equate itself with why I would be depressed. So I call it, it began leaking out. The depth of anguish, the depth of pain began to leak out of my body. And some of those expressions were depression. Some were compulsive behaviors. I would overeat to soothe the anxiety, the rumble of what I felt inside that I could feel was there, but I couldn't attack. What is that? The compulsive behaviors can come out, overworking, overdoing, overthinking, outbursts of anger, outbursts of emotion. You're out of control and over the top. And we don't process the way God intended. We are leaving toxins in the body. So there's physical response, but then there's an emotional one. Even if we don't see the physical manifestation, there will be an emotional one. When we shut down something, we think we're shutting down one thing, but we're body, soul, and spirit, and everything is connected. Everything feeds everything. The body, soul, and spirit, it's all interconnected. And when you shut down one part, like grief and emotion, it shuts down other parts of you. We don't know how it's going to land in our body. In fact, the way I shut down and how it affects me might look different than the way it affects you. The other thing was illness, autoimmune type things that they are now showing medically start with unresolved trauma and pain. Physical manifestations of sickness is a very, very common one.
Gosh, I remember growing up, my mom's way of dealing with about any emotion was to avoid it, to not deal with it, not look at it. And as I said, as a young adult, as a new mom, we do what we know to do. And it wasn't until my world came crashing down through my husband leaving that I really had to learn how to deal with grief, not just for myself, but for the sake of my kids. I did not want my kids to grow up not knowing how to process and how to deal with their emotions. And I did not do a good job of it, but I tried and I wanted to learn and grow. Laurie, how can the young mom who is out there listening right now help her child know how to navigate grief in a healthy way? And what can she do to help them?
I didn't do this one well in the early years. I do it well now.
Yeah.
You referenced earlier, most of us isolate, go cry alone in the shower, in the bed, in the pillow. And I did all of that. I didn't want my kids to see me cry, but I've learned that wasn't helpful for them. They need permission, and the permission is demonstration. And so as I have gotten healed and healthy and now go through grief, even like last week, I cry in front of my daughter. I cry with my husband. I don't stuff it down. I let it up and out. That's the best one because you're demonstrating it's not shameful. It's not weak. It's necessary. It's safe. All those things are communicated by us doing it. The second is checking in with your kids. How are you feeling? It's been 6 weeks and I've noticed that you've been really angry. Say, I just want you to know sometimes our grief comes out in anger. It doesn't mean they're ready to say, I need help. You don't have to harass them. Having a conversation like that at least gives them a clue. You can pray. You can ask the Lord to comfort them. You can ask the Lord to show them. You can pray for people in their world to reach out to them, making sure that music is on in the house, movement, dance, go for a walk or a hike. One of the things I did with my children when their dad died was I said, once a month, we're going to have a night where we talk about dad. We're going to talk about the bad stuff, the good stuff, things we loved. We're going to talk about the things we missed. Because remembering, recounting does ignite grief.
Yeah.
It also ignites thankfulness.
Right.
It also locks in our memories. There's beautiful things that happen when we grieve because we're remembering and recounting and rehearsing.
Laurie, talk to that marvelous mom who's listening today and realizes when she was 10 or 12 or 20, there was a great loss. There was loss, and she never grieved it because she didn't know how, and she didn't have anyone in her life that was giving her the space to grieve in a healthy way. What can she do now that can bring her into wholeness?
Well, you've got several options. One that's simple and free is just start moving and exercising what with intentionality. Prayerful heart, giving yourself permission to remember, giving yourself permission to grieve, inviting God into that place. Unless you're really mad at him, then you don't have to. You can take a break. Reaching out even way after the fact to a group of people that that you just want to start processing with. And there's the option of going to a counselor, someone who specializes in grief, and say, I need help. I don't have the tools. Can you walk me through? There's a lot of grief groups that actually do good things, and there's no parameters on how fresh the loss. Journaling is so powerful.
Okay, but it's been so long ago. That was then, and this is now. Do I really have to do it?
Do you have to do it now? If you want to stay healthy, get better, yes. Grief was always made to be let go of, walked through, released, expressed. And if we don't, you will pay at some point, emotionally, physically, spiritually. When we have a load of grief we've not processed, often, we feel like we have a wall. And that wall, we may not have labeled grief. It's this barrier that you're trying to suppress that causes you to not have the intimacy you want with others.
Laurie, as we wrap up today, I just want to thank you again for being on here and sharing such practical things that we can do to live as healthy, whole women of God who genuinely live, lead, and love from a flourishing heart. And that's what this podcast is all about. Now, I know you help others walk through forgiveness and grieving and trauma in many, many ways. You've got some books and even a manual. Tell us a little bit more about the resources that you offer to the marvelous moms that are listening that might help them get in touch with you, with their own pain, and with tools that you have made available.
I'd love that. My first book I wrote 7 years after my husband died, and it's called Shattered and Then. The second book is kind of the second half of journey. What did God teach me? What did I learn? It's a whole different emphasis at a more mature time in my life, at a more healed. That's called His Mosaic, From Brokenness to Beauty. The most recent one called Dissociation, A Mechanism for Coping with Pain. It's a manual. It's very short, focused on helping understand how we dissociate, how we compartmentalize when we're traumatized. There's two things. My personal website is www.hismosaic.com. The second resource is called the Trauma Healing Center of Kansas City. They have resources for free teachings, free seminars, free groups like grief groups for overcoming betrayal, all kinds of resources.
Great. And I will make sure to put the links for the books and the contact information in the podcast show notes. Marvelous Mom, thanks so much for hanging with Laurie and I as we process through a tough subject like grieving, which is typically something we don't like to do, but it is a part of life. And Laurie has done such a great job in helping demystify it, making it approachable, and giving us tools and language with which to engage and process grief in a healthy, whole way that will lead us into truly living, leading, and loving from a flourishing heart. And Mom, if you are seeking camaraderie and support on your journey, I want to invite you to join the Transformed Mom 6-week cohort. We will meet weekly for group coaching. There will be resources and day-to-day accountability for those of you who want to press into the process of discovering, defining, and developing the leader within. Mom, if you have found this episode helpful, leave a 5-star review and share this with other moms in your mom tribe. Until next time, keep shining bright.